Hello and welcome to my video all about how to make flamed paper leaves. This is a method that you can apply to brown packaging paper to make it look like metal. I'm personally going to cut out paper leaf shapes in order to decorate a picture frame. But you can of course cut out whatever shapes you like and use it for whatever ornament you like. It's a simple and cheap DIY to try, and I'm now going to show you how to do it step by step. To do this project, you're going to need some brown packaging paper or grocery bag paper, something to decorate such as a picture frame. You could use the paper to cover journals or books. You could decorate mirrors with it. You could make gift wrap embellishments. There's all sorts of things you can do. You will also need a tea light candle and a heat-proof surface or mat to put it onto, a container of water. I just used a plastic tray, some matches or a lighter, a cheap paintbrush, tacky glue, basically PVA glue. I used Aleene's tacky glue, scissors, paper towel or kitchen roll, a piece of baking paper or parchment paper, and some metal tweezers, or anything else flame-proof that you can use to hold a piece of paper over a flame. A couple of optional extras include an iron for ironing the paper to make it nice and crease-free, and also some gold acrylic paint just for adding a nice shiny metallic finish to the paper. Okay, so the first step is to cut out the paper shapes. I cut a piece of brown packaging paper off my roll and then ironed it flat to make it a lot easier to work with. I just quickly ironed it on a low heat setting. You then just need to cut out the paper shapes that you want to use. I personally wanted enough paper leaves to cover a picture frame. So I first cut out one paper leaf shape and made sure that the main body of the leaf covered the picture frame before it then tapered off to a point. Once I was happy with the shape, I then used that piece as a template to cut out a load more leaves, enough to cover the picture frame plus a couple of spares. Later on in the process, you might find that you burn your paper leaves a little bit too much, so it's always a good idea to have a couple of spare pieces. The next step is to basically burn the leaves over a candle flame. Before we do this, we want to set up what I call the heating station. I would highly recommend doing this outside because it does involve fire and also it creates smoke. I personally tried to do it outside, but I didn't have a sheltered enough area, so I ended up doing it on a windowsill next to a wide open window. Either way, make sure you have very good ventilation. Make sure that the candle is on a heat-proof surface, and also make sure that you have a container of water next to you, because the likelihood is you will set fire to some of this paper. So I put my tea light candle on a piece of vinyl to protect the windowsill, and then I lit it with a match. Make sure, of course, that there's nothing flammable nearby. You then need to set out a piece of baking paper or parchment paper and put one of the paper shapes on top. Apply a quite generous layer of tacky glue on top of your paper shape and use your cheap paintbrush to spread it all the way to the edges. You want a thin layer of tacky glue all over the paper. You then pick up this paper shape with your metal tweezers, and what you're going to do now is basically burn the glue on the paper leaf. So it's not really the paper that you want to burn, it's the glue. So you carefully move the paper leaf over the flame, making sure that the glue is facing downwards. Don't be afraid to put the paper directly on the flame, but make sure you keep the paper shape constantly moving. I tend to focus on a small area at a time, and every few seconds I check to see which areas of the glue have been blackened. The idea is to blacken the entire glued surface and basically get rid of the white colour of the glue. If you hear sizzling, that's quite good because it means the glue will be bubbling in the flame, but don't keep the same bit sizzling for more than a second, otherwise it could catch fire. And believe me, you're very likely to catch the paper on fire at some point, so make sure if this does happen, you put it straight into your container of water. If you're doing this inside especially, it's not a good idea to blow on the leaf, because then the ash will fall to the floor basically, and you don't really want that to happen. So put it straight into the water. And this is why we make spare pieces. The biggest risk of this happening is when you're burning the edges of the paper. The glue is basically protecting the paper from setting on fire, so if the flame gets to the other side where the paper is exposed, it's a lot more likely to set on fire. So just be especially careful when you're burning the edges of the paper shapes. Then you just repeat the same for every leaf. It shouldn't take you more than a couple of minutes per leaf, but of course if you're doing a lot of them it can be a bit time consuming. Also bear in mind that if you want both sides of your paper shapes to be visible in your project, you will need to repeat the process for the other side of the paper shapes as well, rather than just the fronts. Okay, so here you can see all of my leaves have now been flamed and they're all covered in soot. The next step is to take some paper roll or kitchen towel and just rub the blackened surface of the leaves. You only need to do this for about 5 to 10 seconds for each paper shape, just to remove any excess black soot and also to buff the paper to a shinier finish. You repeat this for all the paper shapes. The next step is optional, but I think it just gives a really nice finish. I put a small amount of gold acrylic paint onto a piece of folded up kitchen roll and used it to apply a very small amount to each leaf. I used the paper towel to rub the paint over the surface and to remove any excess. It would be a lot better to use a paintbrush for this step if you want to add more detail or you want to add the paint to a specific part of the paper pieces. For a slightly different finish, you could instead use a metallic silver, a bronze or a copper instead of the gold. Once my paper leaves were dry, I then simply glued them onto my picture frame, as you can see. In order to join the paper leaves neatly at the corners of the frame, I cut them diagonally at a 45-degree angle, so that they met in a mitre joint. And that's it, I've now finished my picture frame. I really like the end result of this project, particularly the variation in the finish on all the leaves. I don't think people would guess that these were made from just paper and glue. I really hope you've enjoyed this project, and thank you very much for watching.